if anybody did research ahead of time beyond the blog that I wrote, there are endless stream of things that come up when you Google Cathy ten Broeke. I'm grateful to introduce her to you as a real live human being, as a friend, as somebody who's had a very dynamic personal and professional life. She was raised by really good, decent people. And somewhere along the life, on her journey, she came up with this idea that she could make a difference in ending homelessness. When I interviewed her by telephone, the first thing I said to her was, wow, you're taking on something bigger than I can even imagine. How do you do that? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Cathy ten Broeke, who's going to share her story and tell us how we do that. Please welcome Cathy ten Broeke.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is really an honor to be here, and I can very honestly say that I have never seen such a happy group of people at 7 o'clock in the morning. It is amazing. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really humbled, Jim and Amy, for your sponsorship and your support of this work, and so thankful to be here. So I know that Paul and I did not know this when we scheduled this event a long time ago, but this week is National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And so that just worked out really well. And so because of that, I must take a couple of minutes and do just a little bit of education about homelessness in Minnesota. So first question for you. As we think of homelessness in Minnesota, we know on any given night, including last night, there were 10,000 people experiencing homelessness in our state. This is on one night. And if you read Paul's blog, you know the answer to this question, but what % of that number do you think are children? Anybody? 85. Yes, nearly half of all people who are homeless in our state are children, including those young people that was mentioned earlier, sleeping outside. And men who are homeless, I think people most often, when you think of somebody who's experiencing homelessness, you picture a man. You might picture a man standing on the corner with a sign or on a freeway ramp, which is very, very logical because that is, of course, our most visible sign of homelessness. Men make up 29% of all people who are homeless in our state. And the folks you see at the on-ramps, that is a very, very small percentage of people experiencing homelessness in the state. Homeless youth who are not connected to their parents are a growing concern. That group 16 to 24, which we call these emerging adults, they're emerging into adulthood, that is the group who is most likely to become homeless in our state. They're extremely vulnerable as they couch hop from place to place, and they're extremely invisible to most of us. Many people are working hard, very, very hard, but they're not able to afford housing that is available. So this is the face of homelessness in Minnesota. The 6-year-old in first grade who falls asleep at his desk every day because his family's sleeping in a van. The high schooler who, despite homelessness, despite poverty, despite neglect, attends school even though he rode a bus all night to stay warm. The boy and his friends, I actually met this young man in Virginia, Minnesota, who for lack of shelter beds in Virginia was sleeping in tube slides on the playground to get out of the wind and to avoid the police. The vet who returns from duty to face new and sometimes even greater demons and is sleeping in the woods near Duluth. The woman with 2 young children who has fled an abuser and is trying desperately to make enough money to support her kids and her family, but she can't find childcare that she can afford or that is safe. And the man who's working 2 jobs to try to support his family, but who simply does not make enough for the 3-bedroom apartment that they need. So why are people homeless? People are homeless because they cannot afford a place to live, period. And sometimes people will say to me now, isn't that kind of an oversimplification? There's all these other issues, right? There's mental health issues and chemical dependency in some cases. Absolutely, those are complicating factors in people's lives. But I am pretty certain that probably most of us in this room have somebody close to us in our life who struggles with a mental health issue, maybe struggles with a chemical dependency. I know certainly that I have those people in my life. But they're not homeless. And they're not homeless for two really important reasons. They can afford a place to live, or they have the kind of support system in their life that really makes it possible for them to avoid homelessness if something goes wrong. So how do we end homelessness? Well, as you can imagine, we try to create housing that people can truly afford, and then when necessary, surround them with the kind of supports that they need to remain stably housed. And I don't mean to make this sound all entirely simple, but kind of at its core, it really is. It is actually pretty simple. We know how to end homelessness for people. But before I go deeper into all of that, Paul asked me to share a little bit about how I came to this work. So after college at Gustavus, I spent a year teaching in China, and I became really interested in poverty issues and social justice issues. And so when I came back to the United States, I thought, as a woman, I would maybe work with women and children. I wasn't sure exactly what, but something there. And I thought, well, maybe as a lesbian, I'd work with gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender youth and support them in their journey. And then I thought, well, as somebody who had sort of narrowly escaped an assault while I was traveling, I thought, well, maybe I'll work with victims of violence. So it was really entirely logical that as a young 24-year-old woman, I took a job at an all-male homeless shelter. It was absolutely the best decision I could have made. It was utterly life-changing, and it taught me kind of early on that idea of embracing the unexpected, and that has served me well, I think, over these years. So I was working in the shelter in the evenings, and by day I was waitressing at an upscale downtown restaurant in Minneapolis. And at the end of each of my lunch shifts, I would shed this long, black apron, and I'd walk the 20 blocks from the restaurant to the homeless shelter. And the city really changed in those 20 blocks. And I always felt like I changed in those 20 blocks. It was quite remarkable, sort of going from table service to social service. And one day there was a customer at the restaurant who got really frustrated with me because I had given him the wrong size spoon with his soup. And I quit that day. Really, my idea of service at that moment was forever changed. So I worked full-time in the shelter. And I absolutely loved that job. I worked there for 8 years, and the men taught me so much. They taught me about themselves, about resilience and grace, and about all the ways that we were more alike than different. The men at the shelter were not homeless people. They were men experiencing homelessness. They were sons and fathers and grandfathers. They were artists and preachers and really hard workers. Sometimes we're getting up 4 o'clock in the morning to catch the bus to go to work each day. And they were funny and kind and super caring about me and my well-being. They were scared, they were lonely, they were hopeful, and they were sad. In other words, they were us. And while I loved that job, I got increasingly concerned because, I would be so joyful that somebody would finally escape homelessness and get into an apartment, and it was great news. And then I'd come to work the next night and there'd be 10 people walking in that door who I had never seen before. And I started to get more interested in what were the systems and what were the reasons that people were coming into the door in the first place. And so I became interested more in systems and policy. I went to work for a county commissioner where I worked on affordable housing policy and mental health policy. I got a fellowship, traveled around the country looking for nuggets of best practices, what was really working to end people's homelessness. I came back and I started up the Minneapolis-Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness. And this was really a tremendous experience in developing partnerships with people who maybe had not been as engaged in this work. So I wanted to tell you a couple of stories. The partnerships we developed in this office were with business leaders and faith leaders and philanthropy and government and nonprofits, people experiencing homelessness themselves. We all had different reasons for being at that table, but we all had the same goal. So I think increasingly many partners are recognizing that ending homelessness is not only the right thing to do, but it's also really, really smart public policy and smart business. Homelessness is expensive, and solving homelessness is a really sure way to save taxpayer dollars. So this was something that was very interesting in the work with the downtown business community and the police and the policymakers. So 3 quick stories about those partnerships with the police, the business community, and faith leaders downtown. So first, when we were developing our strategies of how we were going to address homelessness in downtown Minneapolis, we identified the need for much stronger street outreach so that police could spend much less time dealing with homelessness and focus more on dealing with crime. And so we got our outreach team up and running, and they were sort of newly on the streets, and the police said to us, okay, we have your first assignment. There had been this gentleman who they had arrested 133 times over the course of just a few years. He'd been homeless a long time. He had a serious and persistent mental illness. And when he'd have a psychotic break, he would write on walls all around town. So he was getting arrested for graffiti 133 times. So they said, here's your guy, go to it. The outreach team started working with him. They got him into housing. And in his first year in housing, he was arrested once. And he went in front of the judge, the Hennepin County judge that he had seen several times. And the judge said, "Where have you been?" And the guy said, "I'm in housing. I'm working with the St. Stephen Street outreach team." And he said, "Great, go keep doing what you're doing." And he sent him away from court and didn't see him again. And so you think of the cost savings alone, never mind the quality of life of this gentleman, which is, of course, our first, thought, my first thought. But the cost savings on this one person who is no longer getting arrested, ticketed, going to court, and all of that. I mean, it is enormous. Another quick story is about these livability offenders in downtown Minneapolis. So the business community and the police, they affectionately called this group the Downtown 100. They were the 100 people who they were so frustrated with. They would, some livability, mostly small, very, minor things, but frustrating for the business community. So, they'd get arrested and ticketed for loitering or whatever it is, and then they'd, get that ticket, they'd be arrested, they'd come back and they'd do it again over and over and over and over. And there was this group of 100 people that were causing the majority of these issues in downtown Minneapolis. Well, our street outreach team looked at the list and they said, 80% of these folks are homeless. Why don't we actually add a housing solution to this conversation? And they did. They got the majority of those folks off the streets and into housing, and offenses went down by 78%. So my final example of the power of cross-sector partnership is with both business and faith leaders. A few winters back, the shelters were packed. There was a downtown shelter called Curry Avenue that was just full of people sleeping on mats, overflowing. And we went down there and started talking to people and realized that so many of the people sleeping there were actually eligible because of disabilities. They were eligible for this state fund. Group residential housing, it could help pay for housing and services, but they weren't getting connected to it. And they weren't getting connected to it because they didn't have that case manager who was working with them and helping them figure out the resource. So we went to the business community and the faith community and we said, would you be willing to just raise one-time dollars to help support the folks who are on the, sleeping on mats and are eligible for this resource? So within weeks, they raised $400,000. We housed 150 people in the first 7 months, got them out, and that money, that one-time investment, has continued to leverage additional resources from the state ever since. So it was just an incredible partnership and an incredible way to use the skills of the business community and the faith community. This was something that neither government nor the private sector could have done alone, but working together, it was really wonderful. So right before I took my most recent position, I worked briefly in the United States government. I went out and I was a special advisor for the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is this group of 19 federal agencies working together on homelessness. I found it incredibly inspiring and came back to Minnesota and said, I'd really love for us to have a similar model where we bring really high-level leadership together around homelessness. And so we now have created Minnesota's Interagency Council on Homelessness. It's 11 commissioners of 11 state agencies and the governor's office. And these are commissioners of, housing and human services, which you might imagine, but also corrections, health, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, public safety, education, all coming together to work on this issue with the real vision of housing stability, creating housing stability for all Minnesotans. Because we're starting to very much understand that housing stability is really the platform from which we can achieve most of the goals that we have as a community and as a state. Whether it's educational achievement of our children, going back to that number earlier in my conversation about the majority of these folks being children, we know that throughout the course of one school year, 13,000 different school children experience homelessness or are highly mobile in this state. 13,000. And when we look at math scores and reading scores, the University of Minnesota did this phenomenal study, and you see all students, their math scores are up here, all students in Minnesota. Poor students who are on free and reduced lunch are here, so obviously not doing as well. Homeless students are down here. So even compared to kids who are equally poor, if you don't have a stable place to live, your academic achievement is far worse. So we know housing stability is key to that. It's key to reducing recidivism. It's key to improving health. It's key to so many major things that we care about. And so we created this Interagency Council. We have a plan that's focused on preventing and ending all homelessness across Minnesota. And this plan is about supporting families and children and youth and veterans. And I feel just that tremendous privilege every day to be working with those partners at the state and throughout the state to make that vision come true. Ending homelessness does not mean that no one ever again in the state of Minnesota will become homeless. That's not really what we mean. What we mean is that we will prevent homelessness whenever we possibly can. We'll do more upfront work to make sure that people don't fall into homelessness. And if they do, we will have the kind of response, crisis response in place to assess what people need and then quickly get them stabilized again into housing. Ending homelessness means that we no longer accept that people languish in shelter and on the streets. And I am more certain than ever that we can do this. We really do know the formula for success after all of these years. We know that when you have the right resources and they're invested in what is proven, evidence-based practices, and then really strategically and targeted at the local level very, very well, we get results. A really good example of this I just have to share is on veterans homelessness. The federal government, along with the state, has really made it a huge priority to end veteran homelessness. And because of that, the federal government has provided unprecedented resources in housing and support services for veterans. We've taken those, we've used them really, really well. All across the country over the last 4 years, veteran homelessness has gone down 33%, and in Minnesota, it's gone down 47%. We are and we will end veteran homelessness by the end of next year. We are on path to do that. So all these years later, since I walked into that shelter as a 24-year-old woman, I've worked now for every level of government with this very distinct mission of ending homelessness. And I cannot count the number of times that people have heard me say that we can end homelessness and they either look at me with just a blank stare or laugh or roll their eyes or kind of call me a Pollyanna or whatever it is. It happens over and over again. And I cannot stand here and say honestly that I have never had my doubts or even moments of despair. But I think this, like other aspirational goals that we all have, I think they can be achieved if there's the will and the courage and the resolve and the urgency and the patience kind of all at the same time. Someone once said to me that if everyone believes that what you're trying to do is absolutely possible, then you're probably not reaching high enough. And I listen to that, I repeat that to myself a lot, and absolutely try to play the long game. I have learned some very powerful things about myself and about leadership through this work. First, I really learned that this is not about doing something for others. I don't do this work because I think I'm being altruistic. I do it because I want to be a part of creating a community that I want to live in. And I want to live in a community and a state and a country without homelessness. Second, I learned that I will not be able to continue to do this work unless I take care of myself emotionally, spiritually, and physically, much of what we've been talking about here. My wheel did not roll either, by the way. So don't get me wrong, I fail at this repeatedly, but when I do, I have wonderful family and friends who are there to remind me. And third, I have learned not to take things personally. Unless someone tells me to take something personally, I in general do not take things personally, or get too discouraged when there are setbacks. There's a story a friend of mine just told me last week when he was in town that I just loved, and it's a Cherokee legend. The legend says that there are two wolves fighting inside each of us. Do people know this story? So the two wolves fighting inside each of us. There's the wolf of hope and generosity, and there's the wolf of fear and cynicism. And the legend says that the wolf that wins is the wolf that we feed. So mostly, more than anything, I have learned that relationships are absolutely everything. Our relationships to each other, the honoring and respecting of the various roles that we play, our relationships to our community of friends and family, our relationships to the broader community and to the world. And I really believe that our fates are really all very interconnected. So we have seen in this work our greatest successes when we have brought diverse groups of people together and when we have asked them to bring what they do best, asked them to bring their gifts to the table. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cathy said, happy Thanksgiving. My guess is you'll be gathering with people you respect and admire and love in just a few days around the Thanksgiving table. I would like you to discuss at your table now, what did you hear and learn from Cathy that you think you should contribute to the conversation at your Thanksgiving table? Ready, set, go. And I'm going to begin our interview with, I think, the most obvious question. And that is, you mentioned these people that we see at the street corner when we get stopped at a stoplight. What should we do?
Mm-hmm. So we just had this question at our table, and it is a question I get asked every single time without a doubt. And it makes perfect sense to me that I do, because as I mentioned, this is the most visible sign of homelessness, and it's really challenging to sort of know what to do with that situation. So what I said to my table is that, this is a really deeply personal decision, what you do in that moment. So please take everything I say with just me knowing that first. I think everybody makes their own decision for all kinds of reasons. My opinion is that handing that dollar out the window is not actually very helpful. But acknowledging people, talking to them, looking them in the eye, making them know that you recognize them as another human being and that you recognize what's going on is really important. So ignoring is the worst part of it. And instead of giving that dollar out the window, what I always really encourage people to do is give resources to the street outreach team or to an organization that is actually working to then solve the problem that that person at the corner is facing, because that's really where we're going to get there. We do have I believe it's still up and running. When I was in Minneapolis, we started a website called giverealchange.com. And the idea is, instead of giving change on the corner, is to go to this website, giverealchange.com, and right there you can donate to our street outreach team. So it's not donating to something completely different, it's donating to a group of people that will go to that corner and talk to that person and try to get them connected to resources.
Outstanding, thank you.
Yeah.
So you do important work, but you also have a very important life. You and your partner Margaret were the first couple married under the same-sex marriage amendment. And so the setting was a spectacular midnight affair where you prepared in a hotel, marched over to the city, were married by the mayor with family and friends, and
your sister did my flowers.
Yes, yeah, that's right, that's right. And there were a few pictures taken that ended up all over the free world. So how has your life changed now that you're married?
Well, I should start by saying my wife Margaret and I had a ceremony 14 years ago. So in our hearts and minds, we have been married for a very long time. And in the hearts and minds of our family and friends and our neighbors and all of that. And at that time, 14 years ago, obviously it was extremely meaningful. I imagine like many people who get married to share that commitment with your community and to know that community is going to be there to hold you and support you through the journey. And so it was utterly life-changing then. So going forward to August 1st of 2013, in a very different way, it was very life-changing. It was such an honor to be the couple that got to be married first at City Hall. But we very much recognized that it wasn't about us. You know, we were the symbol of a much bigger moment in our history as a state, and the hundreds and hundreds of couples all over the state at that exact moment also were being married. It was really an honor. I'd say a couple things though that really changed after that day. Well, we have a son, Louis. He's 7 now. He was 5 at the time of the wedding, and as you can imagine, keeping a 5-year-old awake until midnight for a ceremony. We had no idea how that would go, but I don't know if anybody have seen the wedding, but he was the star of the show. So it was like he was waving to the balconies,
yes,
and he was great. So having our son be there with us, and you know, even at age 5, he really seemed to understand that we had been a family and committed and married for years before this moment, but that the government was just catching up with us. And you know, he really did seem to understand that. But I have to say, I think we feel so much less, like we've had to be so much less vigilant about our life since that day. I mean, before that day, we had all of these legal documents to make sure that every possible thing, you know, was, that we were secure, that Louis was secure, that everything was covered. And I'm still getting used to the fact that we don't have to be so vigilant. I mean, it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, or so defended.
So defended.
Yeah, sure.
And Louis, you know, in preschool and in camps, you know, every once in a while there would be kids who would say, you know, he'd say, oh, I have 2 moms. And the kids would say, well, you can't have 2 moms. 2 women can't be married. You know, so when he was 5, so his little brain was like, wait a minute, I do though, have 2 moms. You know, he's just trying to understand this. And I love the fact that after that day, I don't think anybody will say that to him anymore. It would be very unlikely. And I think his whole generation, I mean, I'm thrilled for them. They're going to grow up at a time where they don't have to even think about who they are or who they love. They get to just be. So, yeah, lots of things have changed.
So what do you do for fun?
Well, lots of things. I play with my 7-year-old. I play a lot of baseball. No, but for myself, I'm a photographer. I really enjoy photography, and so I've been doing that a lot for many years, and I find that's a great creative outlet. Lots of wonderful friends that I get together with, and my parents are here, and my sibling is here. So just spend a lot of time with friends and family.
So how is your faith alive in your work?
Well, I think it pretty much informs everything I do in my work. I mean, I mentioned this in my talk, but I have a very deep belief that we really are all very interconnected, and that if we want to reach our full potential as human beings, then we all have to get there together. Otherwise, none of us really do. And I think that sort of is the foundation for doing what I do, and I feel really grateful that in the work that I do, I get reminded of just the inherent dignity and worth of every human being every single day. And yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to be reminded each day by so many different beautiful souls that come in and out of life.
So this visual you put in our heads of leaving the fancy restaurant and walking through to the other side of town, I found metaphorical to the story that you told us in general. And so what was going through my mind, and I asked you about this ahead of time, is what requires the most courage in your life?
I think, on the bad days, when things feel really tough and when I feel so urgent about this work and things don't happen fast enough, I'm really afraid of failing. I'm afraid that all of these years of work, all of those people who said, you can't do it, there's no way, it's not possible, it will never happen, that gets in there sometimes. And I think it takes a lot of courage to sort of push that back and remember that, in history, these major movements, gay marriage equality being one of them, for example, they don't happen overnight. I mean, it might seem to those of us who are less engaged in that issue that just has amazingly happened overnight. That was decades of work and struggle in people's lives. Many people who are even no longer with us played a very key role in this happening for Margaret and Louie and I on August 1st of 2013. We had nothing to do with that. And so I think about that a lot. And I think, in this movement, it's just, if I could take the ball and move the ball forward, then I have to be okay with that as a really meaningful act.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think of you as amazingly talented, but also young. So
That's so great.
Yeah,
Wow.
What can we expect from you?
I was wondering when you were saying, there's people at the beginning of their career and people at the end of their career, and I'm like, I'm not sure which one I'm in. But,
I think I said first half, second half.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm learning to rethink that myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, geez. My grandmother lived to 103. I'm 51. I'm not even halfway there.
Yeah. That's great. I'm in this for the long. I mean, I really am committed to this work, and I'm committed to Minnesota. So I want to stay here. I want to do this here, and I think when I feel like I've done all that I can personally do in this space, then I'll ask myself that question. But
then maybe you'll come back and speak at the breakfast room someday. Yeah. So we've assembled a group of people who want to help each other. These are good leaders who believe that working together we can make great things happen. What can we do to help you?
This is very obviously a powerful group of people who have a loud voice in your individual worlds of influence. So, I think the most important thing is to please talk about this. I think the more people that understand what's possible and understand, specifically in terms of what we're working on, that housing stability is so important to all of us and being successful all across the state for a whole variety of reasons. That is the most important thing. So using your voice, obviously giving your time. If anybody's interested in working on this issue, I can give them lots of information about who and how to get connected. And then, as you've said so well so many times, giving generously to organizations that are making a difference and actually ending homelessness for people every single day.
So you said makechange.org?
Give real change.
Give real change.
Yeah.
Give real change.
Yeah.